Hi, I'm Andrew Douch. In this short video, I'll talk about formative assessment, what it is, why teachers need to be doing a better job of it than most of us currently are, and why that's more possible than ever because of a range of emerging technologies that make it possible for teachers to both save time for themselves and also provide more analytical and much more prompt feedback to their students. Along roads in Australia now, there are radar devices that can measure the speed of cars. And if you happen to be going too fast, there are two ways that the authorities can tell you that you're going too fast. One is by sending you a speeding ticket perhaps a week after you were measured to be speeding. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of ineffective, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't stop you from speeding at the time, it just fines you later. In some ways, that's what we've traditionally done in schools, isn't it? We teach a topic, and then once we've finished teaching the topic, we give our students a test to sit. We take it home and we correct it, and then we grade it and give the grade to the students. But by that time, it's too late because the topic is finished. They can't take that information and use that to learn the topic better. Sure, there might be some takeaways, some things that they can learn that they could apply to the next topic, but it doesn't help them for the topic that they've just finished covering. The other way the authorities can tell us that we're travelling too fast is to have these overhead signs that either tell us the speed that we're travelling or tell us to slow down or tell us that we're going too fast. And in education circles, that's what we'd typically call formative assessment. Assessment that's given to us in the moment so that we can make a change to what we're doing to get a better outcome. In other words, formative assessment is assessment that shapes the learning. Assessment that shapes the learning. I think it's really important that we do feedback better than we've currently been doing it, and particularly formative assessment. You know, we're living at a time now where students have a higher than ever expectation of getting feedback. I hear all the time teachers saying that students tend to be, disengaged, that they lose focus, that when the work gets difficult, they give up, they don't ask questions as much as they should. And yet those same students go home and they play computer games and they don't lack focus. They're so intently focused that they forget to eat, they forget to sleep. And when it gets difficult, they don't give up, they try again. And when they fail again, they try again. And if they still can't master a level or an obstacle in the game, they go online and talk to other players on forums and get advice and tips, and then they come back and try again. And yet those same students in class are not asking questions and they're giving up and they're losing focus. How can that be? It seems like there's a fundamental disconnect, at least for some students, between how they approach playing a game on the one hand and how they approach learning on the other hand. I think there are a whole lot of things about games that draw young people in. I mean, there's flashing lights and beeping sounds and bright colours, all that cognitive candy, as we might call it. It's also a game, so there's a whole lot of fun involved. There are no real world consequences for failing. You can just respawn and try again. But there's another thing about playing these games that I think is very engaging for young people, and that is that you're getting formative assessment all the time. Every move you make in a game, you're getting instant feedback about whether it was an effective move or an ineffective move. You see your life points going up or going down. I think there's a lot that we can learn from that in terms of education. We need to be providing that sort of feedback to our students, constantly feeding back to them information that lets them know how their learning is progressing. And as I said before, students have an increasing expectation of getting feedback. We're living at a time when young people take photos of themselves, post those photos on Instagram or Facebook, and within a day they get a dozen comments and 50 likes. And yet very often they're doing work for their subjects, handing those into the teacher, and a week later or so they'll get it back with a few comments written on it, and we call that feedback. John Hattie measures the effect sizes of various things that teachers do that impact on learning. And according to John Hattie, if you take two students, one who performs well at school and one who doesn't perform well at school, and you compare them, 50% of the difference is attributable to the student. Some students are just better at some things than other students. 20% of the difference he attributes to the combined influences of the school they go to, their peer group, and their home life. But 30% of the difference he attributes to the classroom teacher, what the classroom teacher does. Now that's enormous, isn't it? It's profound even. Because if Hattie's right, what he's suggesting is that a student who goes to a bad school, has an unsupportive group of friends and an unstable home life, but has a really effective classroom teacher, is likely to outperform a student of equal ability who has everything going for them in life, but has an ineffective teacher. And if that's true, then it raises the question, well, what then do really effective teachers do that ineffective teachers don't do? Well, Hattie has a list for that as well. And at the top of that very long list, the most important differentiator of what makes a teacher effective, the single most important function, you could argue, of a teacher in the classroom when it comes to making a difference to student learning is the provision of formative assessment, the quality of formative assessment. That makes it really important that we do formative assessment better. Arguably, the world's foremost expert in formative assessment is Dylan Wiliam. And Dylan Wiliam says that if pilots flew their planes the way teachers teach their classes, they'd take off in London, fly east for 9 hours, put the plane down, and then say, now let's check our instruments and see if we're in Seattle, the destination. I mean, it's kind of funny, isn't it? But it's kind of true too. You know, I remember as a biology teacher, I'd go into class and we'd teach the ADP, ATP cycle, and then the next day we'd do cellular respiration, and then the next day we'd do, anaerobic respiration and fermentation, and then we'd move on and look at photosynthesis. And then after that, I'd give my students a test. And if they didn't do well, it's kind of too late now because we're off to the next destination, the next topic. But no, pilots are measuring and assessing all the time, every step of the way, constantly looking at their instruments so they know where they are in the journey. At every step of the journey, they know they'll be landing in Seattle long before they get to Seattle. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do that with our classes? I mean, wouldn't it be fantastic if you could walk into class and you could see your class like this? If you could see little thought bubbles floating above their heads, if you could read their thoughts, wouldn't that change what you were doing? I mean, I know for me, if I walked into class and saw this, the very first thing that I'd do is I'd go over to that student who feels like crying and I'd say something encouraging. Wouldn't you? I mean, if we could read our students' thoughts, that would be super powerful. The exciting thing about technology is that it lets us do exactly that. A long time ago, I was marking an exam paper and I was thinking, this is not really very effective. Sure, I'm telling a student that they got this question right or they got that question wrong, but it's not being very analytical and it's taking an awful lot of my time. So I created a spreadsheet, a simple Excel spreadsheet, where you can see across the top, I've put the correct answer. And then as each student's handed in their paper, I've just typed in the responses that they chose. Any questions that they got wrong are red. If they got the answer right, it's black if it matches what's in the green row. And also because this was an exam that students had done previously, I was able to put that, last year's exam results in along the bottom. And so the graph shows me whether my students are performing better than students on the whole perform on that question or whether they're performing worse. That's really powerful for me, of course, because I can see easily questions that are highlighting weaknesses in the understanding of my students as a whole. But along the bottom, I've put in what each of the questions was really testing. And that's powerful because then I can do a mail merge to a Word document and print out for each student a Word document that tells that student which questions they got wrong and enables them to then see patterns in what they're getting wrong. If you take a look at this example, for example, Ashley got 8 or 9 questions wrong, and most of them were really testing her ability to read data. Her knowledge of biology was sound. She has trouble reading graphs. That's empowering for students to learn before they get to the final exam. Of course, the problem with an example like this is that most teachers don't know how to use Microsoft Excel. And I must admit, it took me a long time to learn how to do that myself. Most teachers don't have the time, probably, or the inclination to learn to do something like that. But that's what's so exciting at the moment. There are a whole range of new tools that are becoming available that make it possible for teachers just to pick up the tool and use it out of the box without really knowing anything about the technology at all. Take this as an example. This is an iPhone or Android app called GradeCam. In fact, it'll run on any platform. GradeCam lets you scan papers, and you can see I'm scanning some papers here. All you do is point your device at the paper, it recognizes the paper, it scans it a little bit like scanning a QR code or a barcode. It does the correction for you, saving you lots of time. But once you've done all of that scanning, you then have the option of going in and looking at the data. And you can look at the data student by student, and you can see how each student performed, which questions they got wrong, and so on, and feed that back to the students. But it also lets you have a look at the class as a whole and see which questions the class as a whole has performed poorly on. And that's really powerful. If you can identify a question that most of your students have got wrong, particularly if the students who have got the question wrong have all chosen the same wrong answer, that's very powerful for you as a teacher to be able to then correct what you're doing in the classroom. Not only are you giving better formative evaluation to your students, but I think you're giving formative evaluation to yourself when you're using a tool like this.